This again. All right, good evening. Hopefully this time it'll go all well. I've broken cameras before, but never a computer. I want to first talk about our family's experiences in Nevada during World War II after Pearl Harbor. I want to give you a little background on the Japanese in Nevada first. In 1940, the United States Census was 132 million plus people. In Nevada, there were 110,247 people. The Japanese in Nevada, 470. So you can see we are few and far between. In the map in White Pine County, which is Ely, Ruth, and McGill in the central eastern portion of the state, there were 194 persons of Japanese ancestry, most of them working for Kennecott Copper Mines. Washoe County, which is Reno and Sparks, had 60. Elko County, which is in the northwest corner, had 60. Clark County, which was Las Vegas, had 49. Churchill County, which is Fallon, which is about 60 miles east of Reno, had 35. So that's 398, which left 72 Japanese persons of Japanese ancestry for the entire rest of Nevada. So you can see we were really spread thin, and there were no Japanese communities or Japantowns in any area of the state. After December 7th, 1941, Nevada was placed in military district number 5. And the FBI came and searched all the households for contraband, firearms, cameras, radios, printed materials, and so on. On February 14, 1942, Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Roosevelt, ordering the evacuation of persons of Japanese ancestry from the Pacific Coast states of Alaska. No Nevadan was ever officially relocated. In the spring of 1942, Public Proclamation number 2 by General John DeWitt was issued that created prohibited zones in and around all military districts. And that puts you within 1,500 feet of a railroad, bridges, power plants, whatever you were not to be there. Also in spring of 1942, the Public Proclamation number 3 by General DeWitt, which created curfew from 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. for persons of Japanese ancestry. In February of 1942, in Nevada, all Japanese were released from their railroad jobs in the Central Pacific, Southern Pacific, and so on, and even the mines in Ely and McGill, because they had their own railroad. Also in 1942, Executive Orders 2 and 3 caused many businesses to close or to change operations. Now our family, there's your railroad people, but after Pearl Harbor, my dad, give you a little background on my dad and our family. My dad was Akisumi Hirano Fujii, more commonly known as K. Fujii, born in Itojima, Japan in July of 1898. He was sent to Hawaii by his family when he was 13 years old because he was incorrigible. He spent a couple of years in Hawaii and got to the United States about 1914 when he was 15 years old. And he made his way in this country doing a lot of different things. He was a tailor, a bookkeeper, a merchant, a cook. He cooked for the Civilian Conservation Corps across Northern California, Nevada during the Depression. He was the pool shark, an outstanding pool player, a gardener, a salesman, and a gambler. That's what brought him to Reno. He could read, write, and speak English and Japanese. Now, how he got all that education, I never found out. He came to Reno as a rum runner and a gambler. He started the nursery and gardening business about 1939 in the eastern part of Reno around Spokane Street. In the spring of 1940, he moved the business to 26 South Wells Avenue, just prior to Pearl Harbor. My mother was Kiko Koga Fujii, was born in Iwo Jima, Japan on May 28, 1896. She was just mom, typical Japanese wife, always very stoic, and really took good care of us kids. Our children were my sister Fujii, born in June 3rd, 1927. I was born in October 1932. My brother George was born in October 1934, and the youngest Ken was born in September of 1936. After December 7th, when all the heads of household got incarcerated by the Washoe County Sheriff, most of them were released in 2 or 3 days. In January of 1942, the FBI ordered all radios, cameras, binoculars, and firearms to be turned in. My dad was a deer hunter and a duck hunter, so he refused to turn anything in. So he was charged with being an alien in possession of firearms and arrested and taken to the county jail, where he stayed for 90 days. And then the FBI came to the house and searched every inch of the house and took the firearms, the radio, binoculars, camera, and everything else they thought was some kind of contraband. I might say that none of the confiscated items were ever returned. And they came for the first month every week. And then for the next 3 months, they came monthly. And then after that, it kind of dropped off because they never did find anything. And as a result of the firearms charge on my dad, kept in county jail for 90 days, and then released without charge. And I was 9 years old. And we'd go visit him in the jail, and I'd cry, because I couldn't understand, why is my dad in jail? He didn't do anything. And things were pretty tough on the family while he was in jail. So my mother, a typical Japanese wife, didn't complain or confide how she felt. She just said, we got to keep going, and we must keep the family going. And I'll tell you a story about my mom. This was late in the war, and we only lived half a block from the railroad tracks and the river. And the river was a shanty town where the hobos all lived. And so they would come around in our neighborhood and kind of terrorize the neighborhood, stealing stuff and breaking things and bothering people. But they never came and bothered us, never took anything from us. So one day I asked one of those hobos that came by every day, and I said, how come you guys bother everybody else, but nobody ever bothers us? And he said, that's because Mama lives here. That's what they call my mom, Mama. Because he said, whenever we ask for food, she always gives us something. Your dad always chases us away, but your mom always takes care of us. And so that was the code among the hobos in those days, is that somehow they came from all over the country, but none of them ever bothered anything at our residence. After my dad got released from the jail, he said, Japan is the enemy now. So we won't speak Japanese in this house anymore. And all the Japanese stuff will have to go. You know, you must get educated, and you must get ahead, and don't bring any dishonor to the family. And today, I blame Japan for my inability to speak, read, or write Japanese. Just think, my mother was teaching us. I might be able to understand somebody's today. In the spring of 1942, Military Area Number 5, Zone A18 was established in Reno. That was the downtown core, about 4 blocks square, that contained all the major stores in Reno, because in those days there was no supermarkets, no Walmart, no Costco. It was the major stores, Sears, Roebuck, Dollar Store, were all down on Virginia and Sierra Streets in the banks. And that little 4 block, for those who are familiar with Reno, was bounded by the railroad tracks on the north, Mill Street on the south, approximately Lake Street on the east, and just barely west of Sierra Street on the west. So that was where the persons of Japanese ancestry were prohibited unless you had a travel permit. So my dad was able to get that, so we could go and I could run errands to the store for my mother. And there was an 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew on all persons of Japanese ancestry residing in the Reno Sparks area. So that meant us kids couldn't play outside in the evenings, you know, and in summertime, all kids like to play outside till it's pitch black and your mother calls you home. But we couldn't do that. So we had to stay inside. So in those days, I learned to enjoy reading. And so I could go to the library and get books. And I did a lot of reading. There was also a 5-mile travel restriction from your home address. So that prevented my dad from conducting the nursery business. So we had to close the nursery and open up strictly a gardening and lawn service. So from the time I was 9, I worked with my dad mowing lawns, cleaning yards, doing some pruning and so on, learning all that. And the strange thing is, most of the customers were influential people, all Caucasians. But they all stayed with my dad because he did a good job. And one of the most influential people in the town was the sheriff. And my dad would take me over there on some weekends, and I'd spend one night there, take care of mowing the lawn, watering the lawn, feeding the 3 Great Danes they had, and helping to cook. And they had a black lady who was the cook, a wonderful person. She'd send me down into the basement of this big house on the southwest Reno. They had a walk-in refrigerator, about 10 by 10. Everything was rationed in those days, and everybody had ration books, a book for every member of the family for food, gasoline, a lot of other items. So they would send me, cook would send me down and say, go get me some bacon, or go get me some eggs, or go get me some T-bone steaks. You couldn't get any of that stuff in the store, but the sheriff had them in the walk-in icebox. So even in those days, those that have get, and the rest of us get by without. So we also had a victory garden. My mother and sister tended that primarily and us boys helped. And I also had a little street stand where we sold the vegetables and and fruit. We had a lot of fruit trees. We also had chickens and rabbits. We had about 50 chickens. And my job was to take care of the chickens, clean the chicken house. Oh, I was a rotten job. I always got my brothers to help me do that. And the rabbits. And then when my mother said, go get a chicken for dinner, then I'd have to go out and kill the chicken, catch the chicken and kill the chicken and pluck it all up and clean it all out inside, bring it in ready to be cooked. That was a rotten job. I hated that. And because our home was located within 1,500 feet of the military restricted zone, the railroad, I think is the reason the FBI was so interested in the house all the time. But they never made us move. They just kept coming to the house. In our neighborhood, we had Italian, a lot of Italian, and some German families. And most of them didn't bother us at all, except for one German family had 2 boys. And they bugged me all the time. They were older than me. And so they were always picking fights with me and chasing me around. So on December 5th, 1941, On Friday, when I left school, I had a lot of friends. On December 8th, when I went back to school, I had no friends. And you can't figure out what happened just because of Pearl Harbor. Because in those days, I didn't think I looked any different from anybody else. And if you look in this picture that's there, if you can't find me, then you are really in trouble. But after Pearl Harbor, that was a wake-up call that, well, yeah, you are different. You look different, and everybody considers you to be different. So I had a lot of fights going to and from school, but basically I got along with most kids and they were okay. And those two boys, I say, harassed me all the way through grammar school and into junior high school, which was 8, 9, and 7, 8, and 9th grades. And I never told anybody what was going on except my dad. And he'd say, just get a bigger stick. Well, you can't go to school carrying a big stick. So somehow, every school has got cliques of kids, good ones and bad ones. Well, the good guys somehow found out that these two guys had been bugging me for years. And one day after school, I had a correctional interview with these two guys. And I never got bothered again. And the good guys kind of took me under their wing, and I almost became a good guy. And some teachers were prejudiced toward me. They kind of ignore you in class, but most kind of accepted as long as you did your work and turned everything in on time, you could get good grades. My sister Fujii didn't help me out any because she was a straight A student. So I had some classes that she had, and the teachers would say, well, your sister didn't have any trouble with this subject. What's your problem? So that didn't help me out any. But in high school, I had two teachers that were very helpful. In fact, one of them helped me get a scholarship to go to University of Nevada. On December 17th, 1944, Public Proclamation number 21 was issued, which rescinded all previous proclamations relating to persons of Japanese ancestry. And during the war, as stated, nursery was closed and Dad kept the business going to gardening and lawn service. So as I say, I worked with him, and eventually both my brothers kind of got into help. And all of the prominent people stayed with us. And then when the war ended, we still had them as customers, as well as the Victory Garden and the vegetable stands. And after the war, my dad got his license back, opened up the nursery. Since us boys were older, we were able to do a full day's man's work in sales, manual and menial labor, landscaping, problem solving, so on. So we worked 7 days a week from March through July, sometimes 12 hours a day. But we became the best nursery in town. We had nursery in Oakland, Nashi Brothers, that grew bedding plants for us and vegetables, especially for us. And then during the holiday seasons like Easter and Mother's Day, they would grow them and have them all in full bloom, like some of the pictures show, so that when they delivered to us, anytime we called, they'd give us overnight delivery of 400 to 500 flats of these plants. And people would be standing out there ordering right off the truck. I want that one, I want that one. So that's how good the business was going. And then finally, after 43 years in business, Dad closed the nursery and retired in 1982 at age 84. That empty lot is what the nursery looks like today. Once he closed it up, they were never able to do anything with that property again because it's landlocked. So our family, after the war, Dad became an American citizen in 1962, retired from the nursery in 1982, and died in 1993 at age 95. Mom became an American citizen in 1951 and died in 1952 at age 56. And I must say, I was very proud to help her through the citizenship portion to pass that test. Sister Fujii married Katsuro Murakami in 1950. He had 4 children, boys Casey and John, and girls Piper and Catherine. She became an American citizen in 1962. She was hired by the California Department of Motor Vehicles in 1965 and retired in 1985. And died in 1991 at age 71. I graduated from University of Nevada in 1955. Married Grace Leanne Brown in 1960. Have 2 daughters, Kimiko and Mimi. I left the nursery in 1967. Was hired by Washoe County, Nevada in 1968. Became Director of General Services in 1978 and retired from the county in 1998. I've played, coached, and managed in senior softball from 1970 to 2020. And I've been a member of the Japanese American Citizens League for 69 years. Brother George was in the U.S. Army in 1954 and 55. Married Margaret Theobald in 1959. Fathered 3 sons, George Jr., Josh, and David. He also left the nursery in 1967. Was hired by Washoe County, Nevada in 1970, became head greenskeeper for the both county golf courses in 1980, and retired from Washoe County in 2000. Brother Ken graduated from University of Nevada in 1958, was a lieutenant in the U.S. Army from 58 to 61, married Susan Theobald in 1962, fathered daughter Dawn and son Chet. Left the nursery in 1958. He was hired by Washoe County School District in 1962 and retired from teaching, coaching, and administrative duties in Washoe, Eureka, and Story counties in 2018. He's been a storied girls basketball coach in Nevada, winning several state championships at different levels, and his Reno High teams were rated as high as number 5 in the entire nation when he was coaching. So that's basically how it went in the family. This is an extended family picture taken in 1981 on my dad's 83rd birthday. That was in his garage. The next picture is in 2017, even more of the extended family. This was taken in my nephew's backyard over in Minden, Nevada. So with that, that's what I can tell you about what happened to us after Pearl Harbor. So I try to answer any questions you might have.
Does anybody have any questions?
I have several. Go ahead. But I unmuted myself. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. I just have a question, Mr. Fujii. I'm Isabel, my husband, Harvey. When you said after your father closed his nursery, it was landlocked and no one could return to it or reopen the business. What does that mean, landlocked?
There were 2 one-way streets. This was located on the corner of Wells Avenue, which was a major north-south thoroughfare, and then North Street, which eventually was renamed Coonsley Street. That ran east and west. And then that was on the north side of the property. The south side was an alleyway. And on the east side was another house with a little business. Well, then they built an overpass on Wells Avenue, then widened that street to 4 lanes. So that meant nobody could park on Wells Avenue in front. North Street became one way and nobody could park on North Street. There was no room in the alley, and that house and business behind. And it's not a very big lot. So the owner couldn't get anybody to do anything in there because there's no way you can have a business in there when your customers can't get to you or couldn't come into your business. Because the closest parking would be more than half a block away.
Wow, yeah.
So that's what I meant by landlocked.
Bud, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was absolutely shocked to hear that your father was incorrigible.
Well, for any of you who knew him, well, you can understand what I mean.
My father-in-law grew up with the Date brothers.
Yes,
And they were the two brothers were married to two sisters. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay, yeah. So he grew up with all four of them in California, and then they all moved up to Reno. Where was their fish market?
The fish market was on Sierra Street, just south of the railroad tracks. That was Commercial Row that ran right alongside the railroad tracks. And they were between Commercial Row and then Douglas Alley, which was half a block south of Commercial Row. So they were on, actually, their business was on Sierra Street between Commercial Row and 2nd Street.
That's right in the heart of downtown then.
That was pretty close to downtown Reno. Yeah, that would have been in that restricted zone that they established during the war.
Okay. I know that every time that they would visit Reno, which was a lot, that Frank always gave cookies to them, which they looked forward to. And sometimes they came up on a bus and he would give everybody on the bus cookies. And they loved that.
Yeah, my dad, when in the nursery business, he would always sit on the porch, and anybody that brought their kids in, he always had candy there to give to all the kids that came.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
My name's Tom Bowen. I'm married to Terry, next to me here. Did the authorities ever explain to you why you weren't put into the internment camps? Is that because you weren't on a coastal state?
That's right. The 9066 stopped on the east side of the Sierra Nevada mountains on the California border because they didn't include Nevada. They thought about Nevada, but then there were so few people and they had no access to the Pacific coast other than like Highway 40 and the Feather River route, which was Highway 93 or whatever. But there was very little highway access for people in Nevada to get to the Pacific Ocean. So the threats of espionage or anything like that from people in Nevada was very slim. And that's why nobody ever got moved from there besides the fact that there are so few. Because, California, Oregon, Washington had over 120,000 people, as opposed to Nevada's 400. So.
Well, there was always Hawaii. That internment camp didn't work out either.
Yeah, but yeah, they wanted to intern everybody over there, but most of the population was of Japanese ancestry. So you had to confiscate everybody over there.
Yeah, my understanding from my father-in-law, Kunio Shimamoto, was that most of the people in the Army National Guard at that time when Pearl Harbor were of Japanese descent.
Yeah.
So they already had guns.
Well, yeah, that
So
was
to intern them was not going to work out, and hence the 100 was established, as I understand.
Yeah, because I became the 100th Infantry Battalion. So, yeah, what are you going to do? Jail all the guys in the Army that you got there? Yeah.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service, by the way, or giving this speech. We really appreciate it. And,
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
and my respects for what you and your family put up with.
Well, it made us all better people, though.
It still wasn't necessary.
You still learn to get along better with people.
Mr. Fujii, you know, the sheriff that incarcerated your father for the
Yes.
90 days, was he the same sheriff that had the walk-in refrigerator?
Yes, yes.
Ah,
See, but he's only acting under order from the FBI.
right, but him having all of that, you know, contraband T-bone steaks, I don't think that was, I mean, how did he?
No, it's not
just-
right, but that still goes on today.
Yes,
Those,
true.
there are all people today that have stuff that the rest of us wonder why they have, and
Um,
politics.
But can you describe the sheriff's house at the time?
Oh, yes, now their house was in the southwest portion of Reno, which is where all the rich and influential people live, and it's on the corner of Mount Rose Street and Arlington Avenue. And that, at that time, it was built like a castle. It looked like a castle, had these two turrets
Huh.
and a big porch in front. And it was a big house. It had, I think, 5 bedrooms and 3 or 4 bathrooms, and then a full basement with all that stuff, and a big half a block square yard. And yeah, and they had 3 Great Danes. And then now the people that, and then eventually the Mapes family that built the Mapes Hotel in Reno moved into that house. And after they left it, the new people have added another wing onto the house, so it doesn't look the same now. And everything's growing up around it, so you can hardly see that house anymore now. But it's a big house.
And did this sheriff stay in that position even after the war?
Yes, he was sheriff for probably 2 terms after that.
Hmm.
At that time, the sheriff was the most influential person, most powerful person in Washoe County.
Ah, well, yeah, and he benefited with all his,
Yeah, because see, all the business licenses, everything to do with business
Ah.
went through the sheriff.
I
It
see.
didn't go through the mayor or the city council or anybody,
Ah.
strictly through the sheriff.
Wow,
Everything that, yeah, so he was a very powerful man, but he was nice to me, so I just thought he was a good guy, because
He must have had a big freezer to get all that meat and stuff.
yeah. Well, I got to tell you one story about the dogs. He had these 3 Great Danes. And in the house next door, which was the mansion south of that one, was a house that had 3 Airedales, big Airedales. And there's a hole in the fence. And the Great Dane stayed in the kennel all the time, and unless I let them out to feed them. But the Airedales would come under the fence and run around and pee and poop in Great Dane's yard. So I told the sheriff about that. He says, well, don't say anything, but next time they come in, let the dogs out.
Uh-huh.
So the next day, here they came in. So I went out and opened the gate and said, go get them. It was a mother and father and their son, but they're all full-grown dogs. So the son immediately beeline due south to the hole in the fence. It's like this is a planned military maneuver. He went to the hole in the fence. The other 2 went after the 3 dogs. And they went for the hole in the fence. Well, by then the son was there. That was a heck of a dog fight.
Mm.
And they chewed up those Airedales pretty good. And so the guy next door came over and complained to the sheriff, your dogs chewed up my dogs. And he says, well, I don't know. How did they get in my yard? You know? So they went out and they found the hole in the fence, and that guy fixed the hole in the fence. So the dogs never came back. But that made me like the sheriff even better, because I was getting tired of picking up all that dog poop.
Okay, I have go ahead. Go ahead. I've already asked my
Um,
question, so go ahead.
Okay. So, Bud, I listened to your great presentation at Ollie many years back, but you also talked about some of the other hardships of the other Japanese Americans spread out throughout Nevada. They were working for the railroad or they were working for the mines. Could you share a little bit about what you researched on these other Japanese Americans in
Well,
Nevada?
okay, on some of those, as I say, immediately after December 7th, the Kennecott Copper Company fired all the Japanese ancestry employees, which was almost every one of them. And then they trucked them out. They moved them straight out of town and moved them to Idaho. That's all the people that work for the railroads lost their job. And somebody asked me was commenting on the Ishis, Fumi Ishii. And it was their dad worked for the railroad and he lost his job. And the Nishiguchi family lived in Gerlach, Nevada, which is 100 miles north of Reno, out in the middle of nowhere, but there's a railroad stop there. And the dad worked for the railroad there, so he lost his job and they were living in railroad housing. They all got thrown out of the house in the middle of the desert. And the only place they could stay was this little, about a 15-foot trailer out there with no power, no water. And so they were trying to survive there, and their son was in the Army, Art, and Roy, he had to come home and help them pack up everything and move them to Reno so they could survive. In some of the other towns, things were not real good because maybe they'd be the only Japanese family in town. And so they took a lot of abuse from the townspeople. In some of the other towns, like Fallon, they didn't bother them at all. They were members of the community. There were two families there, very well-known families, farmers. And they helped develop the hearts of gold cantaloupes, if any of you are familiar with those. They're worldwide, famous worldwide cantaloupes. And in fact, Senator Pat McCarran, who was a really big political power back in Washington, called the sheriff of Churchill County, where Fallon is, and told him, don't bother those two families, because I need those hearts of gold cantaloupes back here to give to my constituents. So then there, down in Las Vegas, there was a family that really were some of the best farmers there, and they grew a lot of pretty influential crops there, and they are allowed to keep farming. Other farmers in some of the other areas had to close up their farm and leave because when all these restrictions went in place, they couldn't even leave the farm to do whatever they had to do to conduct business. So that's how some people got impacted, and that's why some of them had to close up business. Some of them, like in Elko, there was a dry cleaner, but the travel restrictions kept them from, they couldn't deliver the cleaning to their customers. So if the customers didn't come and pick it up, their business went down. But a lot of people just quit going there. I mean, that's how bad some of the feelings were in some of these towns. So it was not all bad and not all good. And in central Nevada, in like town like Tonopah and some of those little towns there, they were out patrolling, looking for. They heard the Japs were moving out of California and trying to cross Nevada to go east, and they were going to make sure they didn't come through their town. Well, there were no Japanese that even lived in that county, not a one. So I don't know what they were so afraid of, but that's the kind of thinking that was going on because of the war hysteria. So it changed a lot of people's thinking. So there were good and there were bad that went on, and some of the kids going to school in these rural communities didn't have any problems, or very minor ones. So hopefully that answered your question.
I have another question, and Jeannie's going to regret inviting me on the call because I keep asking questions. Did you or your father know Fred Aoyama?
Fred Aoyama was my second father.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
he kind of took me under his wing when I joined the Japanese American Citizens League. In those days, you had to be 21 to join. Now it's 18, but so when I joined, he kind of took me under his wing and helped me learn the ropes, so to speak. And his family was very good to me, and they were kind of like my second family there. So, yeah, Fred was a great individual. Anybody else?
I have a question, Bud.
Okay.
So I like when you said that you had to, catch the chickens and eat them, like, clean them, because my dad told me stories about doing that on his farm, like but he lived in Winters, California. And so they had to go to the internment camp when he was like 5 or 6. But he said that he couldn't speak Japanese because they wouldn't let him speak Japanese in the camp.
Yeah.
So then when like the war ended, did your dad let you speak Japanese, or did he just not want to speak in Japanese like at all?
No, we never spoke Japanese again. But in my mother's English was passable, but not very good. My dad's was a lot better, but he was a man of few words. He just, instead of using 20 words to answer your question, he'd do it in 4 or 5. So, but that he could still get the message across. But it was, yeah, we never spoke Japanese in that house again. So.
So
Did your parents speak Japanese to each other, or they were speaking broken English to each other?
No, they spoke Japanese when we were kids before the war.
Right, but even during the war and after the war?
Yeah, during the war and after the war, only English.
Really? Oh,
wow. Yeah.
Everything was rationed during the war. What did they do with the Japanese nationals? Did you get the same rations everybody else did?
Well,
No
yeah,
tires, sugar.
They didn't discriminate there. You still got ration books, for every member of the family.
Okay.
But it seemed like they weren't as thick as some of the other ration books.
I was about to ask, did you get as much?
Yeah. So you just had to be real careful on what you bought with those ration books, because you had to spread it out, because you didn't, once the book was gone, you had to go replace it, but you couldn't replace it on a monthly basis. It had to last, some of that stuff had to last 3 to 6 months for you.
Well, you still had to have the money to buy it anyway, even if you had the rations for it. My father's family, if you didn't have any money, it didn't matter how many ration books you had.
Yeah. Well, but we had a corner grocery store that gave us credit. And so my mother would send me to that store for little things like a loaf of bread or whatever. And they would keep it in a little tablet. Our Fujii name is on the top, and they'd put down 1 loaf of bread, 10 cents or whatever it was. And then at the end of every month, my dad would go over and pay it. So that helped, because there were people that were, were still pretty humane, but that was an Italian man that owned the store. So we got along real good with the Italian people. because they got persecuted some during the beginning of the war too, so.
So to the Germans, they tried to put the Germans in
Yeah,
there.
Germans too, yes, yeah.
That would have been most of Wisconsin, though.
So Bud, where did you go to get the ration books? Who controlled that?
That was controlled through, there was an office, an OPA Office of Price Administration. There's a federal office in town, and that's everybody had to go there to get your book.
It wasn't the sheriff.
No, that was the one thing the sheriff didn't control. Well, I don't think he even needed a book though.
So Bud, I think you said that, was it the Kennecott people were immediately fired, let go their jobs, you know?
Yeah.
And then was it the Kennecott people then you said that they had to move to Idaho? Or was it the railroad people? I can't remember.
It was the mining, the people
The
that worked at
Kennecott-
Kennecott that got
the
moved.
Kennecott people. So, I mean, so you fire somebody, what authority do you have to move them to another state? I don't understand how that works.
You see, all those people lived in Kennecott housing. Kennecott.
Oh, okay.
See, the towns of McGill and Ruth were Kennecott towns that they built all the houses.
Oh, okay.
So those people could live right there right next to the mines.
Okay.
And so 90% of the employees all lived in their houses. So they could tell them when to breathe in and when to breathe out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did they have jobs for them in Idaho or no?
No, they just fired them and set them up, shipped them up there, and they had to fend for themselves.
Wow.
No, they didn't
They-
care.
They didn't go to camp in Idaho. Huh? They just,
I don't think so. I didn't research anything on
Oh,
what happened to those
interesting. Huh.
people. But some of them may have had relatives back east or something they could go to see or something. But quite a few of them were from Japan, so
oh.
they probably wouldn't have any relatives, and so they'd have a tough time making it.
Mhm, mhm.
But even in Idaho, there were some people who were at least decent to the people of Japanese ancestry, and so they hired. I think a lot of them went into the agricultural industry
Mm.
because they always needed help on the farms. So, but that's tough to get just rooted out of your house and
Yeah.
be there one day and then 2 days later you're gone. But it happened to so many people, and anyway, because of 9066.
So you mentioned Ely, and most of the people there were miners, correct? That's where Endicott was, or Kennecott? Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay, so Joyce's mother will know this family. There is a family from Penryn named Matsuokas, and Norman Matsuoka got out of camp. I'm not sure how old he was, but this was after the war. And he went, I don't know why, but his family shipped him to Ely, where relatives ran a Chinese restaurant. And so they passed themselves off as Chinese, so they weren't discriminated against. But he does not have fond memories of Ely, Nevada.
well, right after the war, during the war, Ely was not very big. There was not much there other than the mines and ranches. The town of Ely was pretty small. And it's out in the middle of nowhere out there. If you've ever been there, it's 100 miles at least in any direction to come to any kind of civilization. So, and generally it's more than that. Elko is the closest town, and that's about 175 miles away. And then Eureka is the next closest town, which is about 100 miles west, but it's a real small mining town. And then Salt Lake City is quite a ways to the east. So it's pretty isolated out in Ely.
Mr. Fujii, you said after December 7th, all the kids in your class were no longer your friends. Did it remain that way till the end of the war, or did some of those kids, come back to you as friends during that time, or?
Oh, yeah. Most of them eased up on their feelings.
Uh-huh.
And it was really tough for about a week, maybe a week or 2 weeks.
Okay.
But then they started coming and what the heck, we're all still going to school, all still having the same teachers, the same classrooms. And so eventually most of them we became friends again. And some of them I became real good friends with. But they were, I think, responding to their parents' reactions to Pearl Harbor. And the fact that the Japanese are the enemy. So, I wasn't I didn't think I was acting any different from them, and I was never a threat to anybody. But I was just a little guy. When I was about 9, 10, I was probably about 4'6" and maybe weighed 80 pounds. So I found out real quick when I was that age after Pearl Harbor that I'm not able to beat anybody up. So you better learn to get along with people, because you can't outrun everybody either. They're going to catch you and still beat you up. So you learn to talk your way out of a problem if you can, or if you can, just avoid it. So I learned how to get along with people a lot better. I'm the oldest son, so I always thought I was the boss. Well, came to find out real fast that you may be the oldest, but you're not always the boss. So
We all find that out later on in life.
yeah.
Mr. Fujii, where did your parents go to get Japanese food? Did they go into Sacramento or San Francisco, or where did they travel?
Yeah, once in a while, my dad would make the trips, and he'd go to Sacramento and bring some stuff back. Because there was no way to get Japanese food in Reno, and the trucking industry is not like it is today, where they could bring it in every day. So we didn't have a lot of Japanese food other than rice. We had rice a lot, and my mother tried to cook Japanese food at least once or twice a week. So some kind of Japanese food. So soy sauce and rice, and most of the vegetables you could make something Japanese out of it, and then chicken.
Yes, chicken.
Is your family home still standing?
No, it's gone. It stood for a while after my dad retired, because he lived there. And when he retired, and they couldn't get anybody to lease that property or to buy that property, well, then they tore the house down, thinking maybe that would help, but it just made the place look a little barer.
I know you were young at the time, but how did the people in the Japanese Americans in the community feel about Japanese Americans in California, Washington, and Oregon who had to get relocated?
Well, a few people I talked to, they were really shocked that this was that when 9066 passed, and that everybody's, they didn't give them an adequate time to even settle their affairs, because most of them had 2 days to get out. And so everybody was mortified that was happening, but also I think at the same time glad it wasn't happening in Nevada. I don't know what we'd have done. We'd have had, where would they ship us? because right away, of course, they didn't have any camps yet. They put them in the racetracks and, all these other kind of places till they built the camps. But that means you're living in a horse barn for 6 months anyway, until they got those camps built. So yeah, most people I think they were glad they were there in Nevada, but they're here in Nevada, but sorry about everybody that got relocated, because everybody knew somebody that was getting relocated. And, even some of them were probably family members, but.
Yeah, my father-in-law stated that several people got sent to the internment camps. I believe he went to Roar. Okay. They would have relatives in wherever that was. They would come visit them in the camp, but they didn't make them go to the internment camp. The internment camp wasn't in a coastal state, so
Yeah.
it was not unusual, I guess, to have a relative show up and nobody would ask, well, how come you're not in here with me? So, it's just the way it was.
Well, yeah, if you lived inland, you didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, well, silly law in the first place, but
Yeah.
and then what they made out of it was not very sensible either.
But
So
that's what hysteria does. And those few people in Washington and in the military, especially the General DeWitt, was a real alarmist. So he's the one who was primarily, because he had President Roosevelt's ear. So whatever he said, the president would go along with. And
yeah, I think he was a colonel before when the war started.
Yeah.
And he kind of made his claim to fame by the internment camps in the 9066 law. That was, as you said, he had his ear, and I think that's how he got promoted, because my understanding, he doesn't really have much of a background, but I'm not familiar with it. So, but he started as a colonel who found the magic word, I guess.
Yeah, he was at the end of his career. He was going to have to retire as a colonel till the war came. Yeah.
Well, Eisenhower was going to retire as a light colonel, but
yeah.
So the war does, as you said, have some good things and some bad things.
Well, yeah.
So before the war started, but there weren't that many Japanese Americans in the Reno area. Did you do things as a Japanese community, or did you just do your own thing?
Well, I can remember about once a year, usually in about July, August, we would have a picnic with all the Japanese families in this area. And it was usually held in somebody's ranch, kind of like in the orchard, so we'd have shade. And then I'd get to see Japanese people I didn't even know, or hardly ever had never seen before come. And everybody brought Japanese food. Now, where the heck they got it all, I don't know, but they always had Japanese food. And then they'd have singing. The women sang and the men sang, and my dad sang. He was a pretty good singer, but he was kind of like one of the lead singers. I thought, oh, that's my old man. I can't believe it. But so they'd sing songs, and then they'd have some little contests. For us kids, we'd have like sack races, 3-legged race and sack race. And then I remember one contest they had was for the ladies, all the moms, give you 100 grains of raw rice kernels in a chawan and an empty one next to it. And when they said, go, you get a pair of chopsticks, Japanese chopsticks with a lacquer, so they're slick. And you had to move all kernels from one chawan to the other one in the shortest time possible. And my mother won that race. Oh my God. I tried that. I couldn't even pick up the kernels of rice, my gosh. And she was just whipping them out of there. But, I've always had these clumsy fingers, so. Anybody else?
Oh, I have a question, Jeannie. You know, you had told me what your Hawakai group is, but I've forgotten.
What, was that for Jeannie?
Oh, yeah, I want to ask Jeannie. And so I was wondering how all of you are connected through is Hawakai through JCL or is it through?
It's
It's an
actually,
independent group?
it's a branch of the Placer Buddhist Church.
Oh, I'm sorry, Placer Buddhist.
So the Placer Buddhist Church, some of the members did an outreach years ago, and we started a small Buddhist group here as part of the Placer Buddhist Church. And so that's how we got started.
That's a good question, sir. Religion in Nevada during the war. Did you have a Buddhist temple or whatever religion was dominant at the time, or?
No, we had no Buddhist churches at all. My parents were Buddhists,
Okay.
and but they never went to church because there's nothing to go to. There were no traveling ministers in those days, I guess. My brothers, when they were young, would go with their friends to Baptist church.
Mm.
I went once to a Baptist church and once to a Catholic one. I've been to about every religion there is once, just to see what they were doing. And we even had a black holy roller church down the street from the nursery after the war.
Mm.
And they played some of the best music there because they had a tonky-tonk piano and their piano player was playing. And their glee club sang and just beautiful songs. But I was never, my dad never made us go to church, so I was never involved in church stuff.
I was just curious about how the, the fates and the internment camps. I never asked my father-in-law that either. No, as you mentioned it. Did they have any sort of Buddhist priest allowed in camps or whatever? I understand they're non-visiting, but okay, interesting.
I'm sure you're sure they did. Oh, go ahead.
Many of the Buddhist ministers were put into prisons.
Really?
They were more lenient with the Methodist ministers. And so the Methodist ministers went to the concentration camps, and they were usually very gracious about pulling people of all religions, the Buddhists, the Shinto, the Christians together. But the majority of the Buddhist priests were imprisoned.
In a separate prison somewhere?
Yes, just like if you were the newspaper editor of the Rafushimpo or some other higher level business person, either a Japanese national or even a Japanese American, if you were affiliated with these businesses or religions or professors, they were put into separate federal prisons.
Is that where the no?
No, that's
separate. Okay,
that's separate.
Wow.
That's a regular concentration camp.
Those were the DOJ camps then?
The WRA camps.
WRA?
No, well, the main camps for the war rehabilitation.
The actual prisons were just like prisons for bad people.
Department of Justice is what they
Yes.
Right.
DOJ.
You know, when we visited Missoula, Montana, we took a tour of Fort Missoula, and we had a friend with us who's born and raised here in LA. And she said, oh my God, on this plaque on the wall, she found her grandfather's name in one of the barracks in Missoula, Montana. And she said her grandfather was just a fisherman, but they sent him all the way to Missoula. And there he was in prison with the Japanese men and Italian men who were younger. But that's what we were told. Right?
Yeah, we were told that the camps, the DOJ camps were much better. We
Nicer.
just had to follow the Geneva Convention or something like that.
That's what our tour
Not the
was.
war rehabilitation camps.
Right.
So,
Very interesting.
and yeah, it's a bunch of essays with a bunch of young Italian sailors who were on a cruise ship who got stuck in the cruise when the war started.
Something like
Something
that.
like that.
Right. But
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, very interesting. Yeah.
Well, if you're a sailor, then, and you're near the ocean, then you're a threat because you can take a
Right.
boat and
Right.
possibly do sabotage or something. So that's why they moved out. And if you were a sailor, you got moved inland.
So, Mr. Fuji, after the war, did your father have any problems reestablishing his nursery? I mean, he just,
No, because he
didn't?
knew the sheriff.
oh
who
yeah,
issued the business licenses,
oh yeah, I forgot about that.
and and the judges and some of the prominent people. By
Oh,
the minute he went in to apply, they gave it to him so he could start right away again.
huh,
Because by then the nurseries in California and Oregon were back in business
yeah.
doing stuff, so he could buy some stock and start up. Because I remember after the war was over, helping to build the last house that we had, made out of 2x6s, so that you've got a shady area to keep your plants.
Oh, I see.
We built this great big lath house, no building permit, no nothing. You just buy the lumber and start building it. But he knew the sheriff, so it's okay.
Yeah.
But
You said you got a scholarship to the university. Was that unusual? Because your father knew the sheriff, or?
oh no, I got that one on my own, I think.
Well, no, I figured you did, but it sounded like the teacher had a little bit to do with it also.
Well, yeah, the teacher, who was Dr. Effie Mona Mack, wrote the book on Nevada history.
Ah,
And my sister was a student of hers and straight A, and I got an A from her also. But so she liked me, and she knew my grades were pretty good. So she said, you need to go to college and get, and because you can do better than just having a high school diploma.
was that difficult, do you think, for her to, hey, I have this Japanese?
I know, because I think she liked my sister and myself, because we were good students.
Well, I understand that, but the university may not be all that gracious,
Oh, no,
understanding.
I didn't, because this was a Sears Roebuck scholarship. And I didn't hear anything from Sears that said, no, we can't give it to you. So,
Oh, okay. That was just,
yeah. So she helped me, because I hadn't even thought about going to school, but I was wondering, how can I afford to go? Even though it was relatively inexpensive in those days, you could go to school for $150 a semester. But that was a lot of money.
$150.
1950. So, but that got me started. So once I got going, then it was okay.
So, Bud, how long did the curfews and the restriction, the 5-mile restriction, and the that zone, downtown zone restriction, did that last through the entirety of the war?
That lasted until Proclamation 21 came in, but it was in effect, but they didn't enforce it.
Oh, okay. It kind of stopped enforcing it.
They just kind of didn't ignore it, but they didn't enforce it. So if you were really blatant about violating it, then they'd do something. But as long as you were doing something legal and you were quiet about it, because my dad was making contacts about getting the nursery going again toward the end of the war. So he was making trips over to talk to the nurseries about getting stock again, and then my mother would send me downtown, and I didn't have to take my travel permit all the time.
So getting back to the religion question, as you said, before the war, there was a lot of Japanese living in Ely area. And they were minors, so there was probably a pretty high mortality rate. And there's a Japanese section in the Ely Cemetery. The Salt Lake City Buddhist Church has an annual pilgrimage to that cemetery. and the minister conducts an annual memorial service there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when the people that were buried there, well, the families all left, so they had never had any family left in Ely to look after those grave sites.
Oh, I guess not. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if any of those people went back there after the war or not.
Bud, how old are you now?
How old are you?
How old am I now?
Hmm.
I'm 89, but I'll be 90 in 6 weeks.
Wow. That's
Early
amazing.
happy birthday.
Yeah,
Yes,
happy birthday.
and many more.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for doing this.
Hold up. Yeah. Thank you.
Bud didn't mention this, but he was a very good baseball player.
Mm.
And actually, they played against some Japanese American baseball teams. And one of my uncles was on the team. So it ended
Oh,
that they had played against each other.
Mm.
Wow.
Mm.
uh,
What a
Mr.
small world.
Fuji, did you say, Mr. Fuji, you've been a longtime member of JCL, right? Did I hear that? That you're a longtime member of JCL?
Yes.
Is it the Reno chapter?
Well, the national chapter, the Reno chapter and the national chapter,
Mhm.
national JC. I've been, 69 years I've been a member of that.
Okay.
Mm.
Three times president.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah, that's per Grace Fujii.
Yeah, but each term was 4 years long.
President.
How were we nominated?
Well, at least you didn't have term limits.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? No? Okay.
No, but my thanks again for your time and to let us have your history. That was great.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you all for listening.
And thank you to Grace for being so supportive. And for Mimi, who had to leave early. That's why we had to switch out the computers.
Jeannie, maybe they could go around just to introduce a little bit about where they're from, born in Reno or from, and then I just want to know, what is the population of the JAs currently in Reno?
I don't know what the population is now, but the Asian population in Nevada is the fastest growing minority group.
Really?
Yes,
Why is that? I mean,
I have no clue.
No state taxes.
yeah, but it's been that way for.
But it's a variety of different Asian Americans. Grace is saying Tesla
Oh, I
that's
forgot.
good.
Yeah.
has something to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of tech jobs here. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
and there's a lot of little businesses opening up.
With
And a lot
Asians.
of them are Asian kind of businesses. So,
Let's say Asian.
Right. Well, there are a few I know from California because of the cost of living in California. It's,
Oh.
it's just yes, they
Yeah.
need to because it's less expensive.
Yeah.
The taxes are lower and it's just a little bit easier to live here.
Yeah. So does that surprise you, Mr. Fujii, that when you go around now, you see a lot more Asian faces than when, you were growing up?
oh yes. Every time you go to a major, grocery store, department store, whatever, you see all kinds of Asian faces.
Yeah.
And, they're not all Japanese and Chinese like they were originally.
Yeah.
Now you're getting, Southeast Asians and then
Yeah.
just Asians from all over the world. And I always wonder, what brings them here to Reno, wherever they're from, because that's, Indochina is a long ways from here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the secret's out then, I guess. Reno's a hot spot.
That is one thing about Nevada that we've learned, Reno in particular, is that there's a small community of Japanese Americans here, but we all tend to be, except for Buddy
And me,
and Grace,
born here.
they're from other areas of the country,
Sure, right.
many from California, but most people are not native Nevadans. So, which is interesting because everybody has very interesting histories and backgrounds, which is great.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It was, yeah.
So anyway, does anybody have any other questions? Because we'll wrap it up otherwise. And thank you to Buddy.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank
Thanks,
you.
Bud.
Thank you.
Yeah, great slide presentation.
Yes, very nice. Thank you. So,
Very good.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you, Bud.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.